Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Peyton Smith, and I'm the Partner Engagement Coordinator at the Canadian Centre for Food Integrity. I'm sitting here with Joanne MacArthur from the Nourish Network and Len Kahn from Contact. We have partnered with these great businesses to bring you insights into the top food trends coming up in 2020. CCFI is working to bring resources and information to the food system with the hopes of building public trust to stay tuned in for continued webinars moving forward. Please use the webinar software to type in your questions. After Joanne is finished, we will work to answer all of the questions at once. I would now like to pass the torch to Joanne.
Thank you, Peyton. Okay, now how do we, all right, there we are. Hopefully we can see the slides advancing. Nourish, for those of you who don't know it, I like to say we know a lot about a little. So don't ask us to sell insurance or cars, but we specialize in food and beverage. And because we specialize and we work across the whole food ecosystem, we're able to see how things connect. So we do an annual trend report. This is the 4th year. I'm going to talk to you about the 2020 report. But you can see the last couple of years, the last 3 years, the trends, those still apply. And we feel pretty good about our track record and things that we've called. And I think I should also say that when we talk trends, we're not talking fads. We're not talking about, the flavor this year or, charcoal and ice cream. It's about those fundamental shifts that we're seeing in the food system. And so we try to look at what's underneath the change in behavior, because all of you, it's a long time to develop new products and produce new things. So we want to be mindful of that and look further ahead. So diving into 2020, it's all about me. So let's dive in, and we're going to go into each one of these, and then Len Kahn is going to finish up and talk about some ag-specific trends. So the first trend is unpackage me. We see this as one of the biggest issues facing the food industry right now. If you think about the terms single-use plastics, this was not a term that 2 years ago was part of the consumer lexicon. And now everyone's talking about it. We saw the turtle with the straw up its nose, and now microplastics are actually showing up in our poop. So it's becoming very, very personal. And only 10% of plastic actually gets recycled. And you can't really blame consumers, because if you think about it, each municipality, the rules change. They change from place to place, and it's very confusing. So consumers want to do the right thing, but they just don't know how. There was actually, I'm a data geek, so excuse me when I look down to cite some research, but the Agri-Food Analytics Lab out of Dalhousie found that 94% of Canadians surveyed said they're personally motivated to reduce single-use plastic food packaging because of the environmental impact. But of course, when they say that, what they really want is industry to take care of it for them. So what's happening, we know that in Europe, they're starting to ban single-use plastics. The feds here are talking about it. Some municipalities are actually jumping ahead and doing it as well. So if you look at Vancouver, they have actually banned foam packaging for food and beverage. And of course, you've got this consumer trend on one hand, but you also have consumers wanting portability and convenience. So how do you do that? And one thing we talk about is upstream versus downstream thinking. And there's, I don't know if anyone's ever heard of Zola's parable, but it comes from a public health. And it tells a story of these two friends who are having a picnic on the side of the river. And they see this kid yelling for help coming down in the water. So they go out, they save this kid. And then they look over and another kid's in. So they go in, save that kid, and then another and another. They're exhausted trying to save these kids. And then one friend sees his other friend walking off, leaving him. And he's like, "Where are you going?" He said, "I'm going upstream to stop the guy who's throwing those damn kids in." So it's all about that upstream thinking and tackling the problem at the source. So, what are going to be some of the possible solutions out there? We've seen edible packaging made out of seaweed. I think that may be a little gimmicky, frankly. But this is Nature Knows has some corn-based packaging that's completely recyclable. And it it takes care of makes things more shelf stable, extends shelf life, but also the whole thing is made of corn and it is compostable. And I think you're going to see some more closed loop systems. Of course, the challenge with all of this is how, in a world without packaging, how do you tell your brand story? How do you talk about the benefits of your product? So as marketers, that's something we really need to be aware of. In store, we're seeing more systems coming, and there's a bit of a consumer guilt offset. All of us are using Amazon and Amazon Prime. We need it tomorrow. It comes, and of course, you have a small thing that's covered in lots of plastic and airbags and cardboard. So the consumer needs that bit of a guilt offset. So you're starting to see, bring your own container. Metro, you can now bring your own container. They have to grapple with the whole food safety thing as well. Bulk Barn, you're seeing the same thing there. And now Loblaws is about to test, this is called TerraCycle, their Loop program. You can see the Haagen-Dazs there. And what it is the consumer buys this and then they bring it back to the store. And it reminds me of my background was in the beer industry. We had something called the industry standard bottle. That beer bottle, everybody would have a different label, but that beer bottle would be reused an average of 12 times. And so this is a very similar system to that. And I think we're going to see more of that. We're seeing a US coffee chain called Blue Bottle. They had compostable cups. They're very environmental forward, but they found that it was still ending up in landfill. So that wasn't a solution. So now they are testing reusable cups. So again, you go away with your coffee cup, you bring it back, and it's like an industry standard coffee cup. And you can also see their Coke in Europe is actually testing this packaging that gets rid of plastic, and it's just cardboard as well. So again, the whole idea of compostable is one way of going, but reusable is another. And you can see a picture of it there. So things to consider. If you're a manufacturer, how are you going to balance these seemingly conflicting consumer desires? How are you going to make sure that you can still brand? How can you tell your origin story? And also some of these systems will start locking in brand loyalty. That Haagen-Dazs, I showed you that container. Is that going to make somebody use Haagen-Dazs ongoing? How do you break into that circle of brands? So some things to consider. The next trend is called Sober Me. And what we're seeing is a real rethinking in terms of alcohol. And we just came off Dry January. A third of Canadians claimed that they were going to participate in that. But we also have some Nielsen research that says that 66% of millennials have reduced their alcohol consumption in the last year. The beer industry, their sales are down. Wine down for the first time in 25 years. And I think there's a fundamental change, especially with Generation Z and millennials. A lot of the ways that generations redefine themselves is being different than their parents. So these are generations that have seen, their parents drink a lot. And so they're cutting back. They also live in a time of social media where nothing's forgotten and everything's documented. So that's also part of the issue. You've got legal cannabis in there and not wanting to maybe mix the two. But there are also these two books that have been on the bestseller list for over a year that have actually started movements called Sober, Curious, and Mindful Drinking. So either not drinking or cutting down and drinking less. And these, there are online communities, and there are actually even meetings, very similar to AA. So these are people who just want to drink less or just have an alcohol-free lifestyle. And so sobriety is starting to become hip. And so what you're seeing instead now in bars is, how can you cater towards this? If you're part of the beer industry like Heineken, how can you be a part of this? And and help consumers and at the same time protect your bottom line. So this is something that Heineken did in the US. They gave away 0 beer for dry January. And you actually, it was a promotion, you signed up, you got, it was kind of like an advent calendar. So every day you would open it up and there would be a new bottle of 0 alcohol beer for you. And we're also seeing, of course, legalized cannabis. It's viewed as being healthier, fewer side effects, and certainly lower calorie than alcohol. And so, consumers still want those drinks with benefits. You don't want to be the designated driver type who goes into the bar and just orders the club soda and gets kind of stink eye from the bar staff. So, what is the need state that consumers want when they drink? It's a lot of times it's to relax, it's to feel better. And so there are products out there that have been around for quite a while. Think about Ayurvedic medicine, these things called adaptogens, nootropics. Those are reishi mushrooms, turmeric. These are things that have been really well tested. In fact, there's more body of research around these kind of products than there is actually around cannabis. And so some private equity companies think that this is actually going to be a possibly bigger market than cannabis and drinks. Because if you think about it, the rules around producing food and beverage using cannabis is still quite prohibitive. You have to do it in separate facilities. So there may be an opportunity to come in with products that actually deliver a lot of the same benefits and that have a lower barrier to entry. And we know that consumers are actually moving away from vitamins as well. They're looking at their food and beverage to add that function for them. They'd rather eat or drink it rather than take a pill. And so you're seeing a whole new generation of alcohol companies. Seedlip is a product you may see here. It's done the same way as gin, just without the alcohol. We're seeing a real premiumization of coffee beverages as well, certainly on premise now in restaurants. Mock cocktails are being elevated, and you're now paying, $12 for something that's really been crafted well. So there's certainly opportunities there as well. So if you're a manufacturer, is there a way that you can be part of this and offer some of these ways of drinking better and also make more money doing it? The next trend we see is something we call Nomi, and that is where artificial intelligence and this whole hyper-personalization is coming. And you've probably been reading about, all these DNA research that will, tell you about your ancestry, but also will recommend ways to eat based on, your microbiome, your gut bacteria. That your cell phone is starting to be able to tell you more than just how many steps you walked in a day. And so now you're starting to see a whole bunch of products that are personalized based on that information. And industry is jumping into AI as well. Walmart bought an AI company last year that is actually going to give personalized shopping recommendations based on consumer shopping behavior. McDonald's bought 2 AI companies last year. One actually predicts the weather and will make recommendations on the drive-through menu based on what's happening in that local weather. So if it's a hot day, it may recommend an ice cream. On a cold day, it may recommend hot chocolate. And they also bought another AI company that recognizes your your license plate on your car, and will also serve up recommend what you may want to order. Slightly terrifying in a way. And then there's this other company called DNA Nudge. And I'm going to play a video for you. This is a company that has been in test in the UK, and they are about to come to the US. And it really shows you how far this can go. And just excuse me while I figure out how to grab this and move this over. Got it. Yes. I'm having a good tech day.
We're all different. That's because our DNA is different. In fact, your DNA is unique to you, which means different foods suit our bodies better. DNA Nudge understands your body's needs. This makes it the perfect shopping companion. When you're out shopping, it nudges you to make healthier choices. Choices that are right for you. It's not a diet. You still decide whether you want to eat this or this. DNA Nudge uses your unique DNA code to nudge you, helping you make the right choice for you. We simply do this by indicating green or red, helping you to make an informed choice. You can also use Nudge Share based on your family's DNA. So if I get a green light on a snack, should I eat it? You can, but don't overdo it. We live different lifestyles, and DNA Nudge promotes an active lifestyle. Sitting still for too long during the day may change what DNA Nudge recommends you eat. For example, a snack that indicated green might now be amber. To get back to green, you need to move a little. Remember, move a little and get the green light for your health. Because we're all unique, one of these snacks will suit you better. And over time, many small changes can make a big difference to your health. My DNA, my choice.
Yay. So slightly terrifying and very, if you're a Trekkie, it's very, oops. Okay, and there, thank you. Okay. So I don't know about you, I'm a Trekkie, so it feels very Star Trek to me. Some of you will remember Watson, IBM's Watson from Jeopardy. And so now they've come up with something called Watson Trend Spotter. We know that 85% of new products fail within 2 years. This is a way of upping the odds. And they also claim that it can take 7 months out of development time. And what it does is it captures data from sources like Instagram, Google Trends, social forums, QSR, quick serve restaurant menus, and they've got a proprietary algorithm that actually helps you spot trends before the trend. And of course, it just doesn't have to be about, we've talked about very futuristic things, but it can also just be about, it can be low tech. It can be things like tapping into consumer nostalgia. I don't know if anybody watches Stranger Things, this series, but it's set in the 80s, and they were about to come out with New Coke. We all remember the New Coke fiasco. They actually reintroduced New Coke. It was on Stranger Things, and then they launched it at store. And that was a way of really tapping into consumer nostalgia. So if you're a manufacturer, how can you tap into consumers' desires? But also, I think there's a consumer trade-off. When do you go past that line of okay, and you feel like you're getting some value for the information that you're sharing, and when are you getting into the creepy? So I think that there's a trade-off there, and frankly, from what the generational research we've seen, younger generations are much more comfortable with this because this is what they've always known. So the next one trend is Save Me, and this is talking about environmental impact-based eating. And certainly in the last federal election, we saw climate change as one of the top issues, and that has continued, especially with the Australian wildfires. Italy, interestingly enough, we don't think of Italy as really a leading edge country, but they have mandated 33 hours of curriculum for high school around climate change. And that's just not one course. It is woven across all the different courses that they take. So that's been mandated. And the US, based on what you hear, it sounds like they don't want to talk about climate change, but that's not actually what's happening underneath. 80% of parents say that they want climate change taught in school as well. So we think you put this all together and we're at a bit of a tipping point in terms of sustainable consumption. And so we may start seeing consumers make food choices based on environmental or carbon footprint. And again, there was a recent Angus Reid Farm research done across Canada, and 3/4 of the consumers said that they understand the damaging environmental impact of eating red meat, and they believe it's important to reduce their carbon footprint. But at the same time, only 38% said that they would indeed reduce their meat impact to do so. So there's this real gap again between desire and actual behavior. And I think part of the reason for that is, flexitarianism can be really tough. Becoming vegetarian can be really tough. And we always look at it as an either or, but what if it's an and? And when I mean and, I'm talking about blended products, blended protein products. And this is again, an old idea that's kind of coming back. So certainly, my mother, when meat was more expensive than it is today, she used to add oats to the oatmeal to extend, or oats, sorry, to the ground beef to extend the hamburger. And there was even something called victory meat during the war, and there were posters around it asking consumers to do that. And so we're starting to see blended products show up in the US. Tyson has this blend called Raised and Rooted, and it's interesting that Tyson used to own a big stake in Beyond Meat, which they sold just before they came out with this product. And so you're starting to see more blended, and it's a blend of plant protein along with meat. So you're still getting all the protein that consumers are looking for, just less of a carbon footprint. And then you have companies like Maple Leaf Foods. If you watched the Super Bowl on Sunday, you would have seen a Maple Leaf Foods ad, and it wasn't about their products. It was actually about the fact that they are now the first large company in the world to be carbon neutral. And they've done that through wind and carbon offsets. And so, their stock also got a pop because now they're part of that environmental, social, and governance suite of stocks that a lot of people are looking to invest in. We're also seeing blended products, not just in meat. So this first one is in the US, and it's actually a bunch of US dairy farmers that have come in with a mix of dairy and almond. Bell, which is a big company out of France, they have those little Baby Bell cheeses. They have come out with a half plant-based, half real cheese hybrid. So you're starting to see these interesting products. I don't know if you saw the news a couple of weeks ago, Starbucks CEO actually asked customers to no longer use dairy in their beverages. They did an audit of Starbucks and they found that 81% of their carbon footprint came from dairy. So kind of unbelievable that, you'd see Starbucks asking consumers to start doing that. So consumers, they may also start moving to more sustainable animal proteins, certified humane. I thought this was interesting. We're seeing a real trade up to things like grass-fed, and of course you can charge more for it. So it's the whole concept of eating less but better. And this is Audubon certified meat. And, because they protect the grasslands for birds, Audubon has actually given their seal of approval to this. Another interesting thing going on in the UK, they had in January, Public Health, not-for-profit, came out with something called Organary. And it's the whole idea of, let's not waste things. And organ meats are something that used to be part of the consumer diet years ago, has fallen off the radar. And so they were trying to encourage people to eat organ meats again as a way of minimizing waste and maximizing nutrition. So again, you may already have a lower impact product that you're just not taking credit for. So, can you be doing that? Should you be looking at some sort of blended to make it easier for the consumer to do the behavior that they want to? Or is there some carbon footprint offset you could be talking about? So the next trend is called Science Me. And we think that there's been a real trend away from processed food over the last few years. Consumers want to eat real whole foods, but then we are seeing plant-based burgers coming out. You can see the ingredient list here for Impossible and Beyond. They're quite long, and these are processed foods. And so, will consumers who have rejected other processed food say that they don't like GMOs, even though that most of them don't know what a GMO is, are they going to embrace these kind of foods? And I think it's interesting to see, again, this is in the US, this organization has been taking out full-page ads, actually asking the question about what is in these products, and are they actually better for you? And it's the Center for Consumer Freedom. It's a not-for-profit, and took some digging to find out who is part of this, but probably not a big surprise. Tyson, remember Tyson? They're part of this. Individuals, some fast foods are also doing this, but they're just raising the question, are these truly better for you? And there's been some recent, the British Journal of Medicine's come out with a couple of studies talking about the danger of ultra-processed food. And there seems to be some research out there that says when you take a plant protein, a pea or something, and you pull it apart and then you reconstitute it, something changes in terms of the way we metabolize it. And so this whole concept of ultra-processed food is starting to be discussed. And in the interest of time, I won't play the video, but you can see at the bottom of the slide, there's a lot more Googling of ultra-processed food. It's been in all of the major press as well. And you've also got Chipotle coming out and saying, we are not going to use these kind of products. We're going to stick with whole foods, organic tofu, black beans. So, the question is, are you going to start to see consumers rejecting this? We know that Beyond Meat, Impossible Burger are reformulating to have a shorter ingredient list. In France, they're actually, the health regulators are talking about forcing products to put ultra-processed food on the front of their label. So that's something that should be on everybody's watch out, what's going to happen there as well. So again, if you're a manufacturer, what's the role for Whole Foods? Is there a blended product that you should be looking at as well? Our next trend is Entertain Me. And this is where we see grocery shopping is moving from chore to experience. So we've seen in fast food a huge move to online ordering. You have not seen grocery move as fast as people thought, but what is moving quickly are staple products. And paper towels, diapers, those sort of things are moving more online. It's interesting to see grocers like Farm Boy. They're a chain in Ontario that's been purchased by Sobeys. They position themselves as your second grocer, because they don't carry a lot of what you would consider those kind of commodity products. They're all about the entertainment factor as well. And so what we're seeing is, consumers are going to continue to go to the grocery store, especially younger generations. They actually enjoy grocery store shopping more than previous generations at the same age stage. They crave that in real life experience, but they want inspiration. So they want to see ideas. And they want to see food demonstrations and things like that. So we're seeing more in-store restaurants. Some of you may have heard of Eataly that's just launched in Toronto. And Longo's has just opened up in Liberty Village. The entire grocery store, 23,000 square feet, the entire place is licensed. So you can get a drink, you can get a glass of wine or a beer and walk around and shop. And it's all about demonstrations and inspiration. You know, if you want to go online, you can see lots of things around Italy as well. Lots of entertainment or entertainment. We also know, and this is research from, you know, CCFI, Canadians are disconnected from their food system. They want to know more about it. And who do they trust in terms of the food system? It's farmers and producers. And so is there a way in this new grocery, the role of grocery, is there a way to bring those two together, especially through some of the AI and virtual reality tools that are out there? This is an Irish potato chip company. They are actually farmers. They farm the potatoes as well as make the potato chips. And they've got something on the back panel called Spud Nav. So you can actually go onto their website, you put that into the Spud Nav tracker, and it will instantly show you the field where the potatoes were grown that are in your potato chips. And you know that it's going to taste, those potato chips are going to taste a lot better, and you're going to feel a lot better about them. Food always tastes better with a story. Out of the US, Vital Farms. This is they have 200, I think, small producers. And so you can actually go and type in or use a QR code and you can see the hens walking around that just laid your eggs. Pretty fascinating stuff. And so, you know, as a manufacturer, how do you maintain, or a producer, how do you maintain your place within traditional grocery as we move to this more entertainment model? What can you do to contribute to that shopper experience? And I'm going to switch to the final trend before I pass it over to Len to talk about some of the ag trends. And this is about Keto Me. So guaranteed that either you or somebody you know tried the keto diet over the past year. It's certainly the most popular diet in North America, the most discussed. Last year's trend report, we talked about the move to selective eating. And that's where we think of ourselves as omnivores, but actually, you know, a very small percentage of us are true omnivores anymore. We all have our own way, customized way of eating. It may be gluten-free, it may be dairy-free, it may be pescatarian. We all come up with our personal way of eating. And so keto, you can see it was the most Googled thing diet last year. It was 6 of the top cooking books, Instagram tags over 20 million posts and rising, and dietitians expect that that trend will continue this year. Why is that? Because you see quick results, but it doesn't seem to be a sustainable diet. So, you know, again, Dalhousie University has some research that said twice as many Canadians have tried and dropped the diet than are still actually on it. But people are certainly keto curious. This is natural market. You know, you can shop by diet, and keto is a big part of that. And so we see this moving from a diet to more of a lifestyle. So consumers may gravitate towards parts of this diet. And at the most recent CHFA, Canadian Health Food Association show, when I was walking that show in the fall, I saw a lot of, rather than no carb products, slow carb products. And what those are, it's, you know, using the whole GI index, glycemic index. It is something that was actually invented at U of T. And it's all about how our bodies handle the carbohydrates and how slow we digest. Slower digestible sugar's better for you, and it keeps your blood sugar level. And so what we think is we're going to see this move from no carb, which is really difficult, not necessarily healthy, and let's be honest, carbs are delicious, to more of a slow carb movement. And not crazy. This actually exists in countries. They actually have to put the GI numbers on the front of packaging. So Australia, for instance, does this. And we know in Canada that Diabetes Canada tried. They lobbied the government to have GI numbers on the front of labels. Didn't go through, but rumor is that they're taking a second crack at convincing Health Canada. So something that should be on your radar. But also, you know, keto products, you know, could be like gluten-free. If you talk to somebody 10 years ago, they thought gluten-free could be just a fad, not a trend. And now you see whole parts of supermarkets that are dedicated to gluten-free and products that call that out. So there still may be consumers who want to dip in and have a keto snack without being full-time on the keto diet. And now I'm going to pass it over to Len.
Thanks, Joanne. Sorry for the slight delay there. Joanne was using one of those chair balls that I was a little nervous I was going to fall off of. So anyway, my name is Len Kahn. I'm the president of a company called Contact. We are a full-service marketing communications company. Like Joanne, we know a lot about a little. What we think we know something about is the field of agriculture. A little bit of background on how we came to know each other and work together. So I grew up, my dad ran a cattle export operation out of Brooklyn, Ontario, which is now a housing development. Went to Guelph, worked in the industry, started my own business. So essentially I've worked in ag for over 30 years. For most of the time, including my time at the University of Guelph, we tended to talk about two things: how to increase yield, how to decrease costs. So basically production and efficiency. These were the two things that were paramount in ag. Over the last period of time, I can't peg it exactly, but I'd say the last 5 to 7 years, the conversation has started to change across ag. And we talk about things like food quality, health information on labels, food waste, environmental impact of agriculture, even things like right to farm, social license, and humane treatment of animals. So these are different conversations which caused us to reach out and say, hey, we better know a little bit more about the food industry. And so that's why we operate with Joanne as what we call the Nourish Network. So it's like Donnie and Marie. I'm a little bit country. She's a little bit rock and roll. Trends in Canadian agriculture, I'm going to make a generalization here. A little different than consumer, most specifically in that ag tends to move slower than the consumer marketplace. So if you think about the consumer marketplace, there's any number of things, including things like Uber and Amazon, which have fundamentally changed the way that we live our lives in a relatively short period of time. Agriculture tends to move slower than that. Even when you think about the move from the fax machine to email. So when I say the word fax machine, it sounds like a joke, but I would say until about a year ago, we still would get requests and have to implement some of our communication plans over the fax machine. Why? Because there were still, and probably still are, retailers out there, for example, who still make use of the fax. Why? Because it works, and why change it if it works? So things do tend to work a little bit slower in ag. So when you're looking at trends, they tend to be a little bit more slow moving. Having said that, when ag goes, it can go fairly quickly. So back in the day, I remember when GMO soybeans were first coming on the market, we first heard about them in the US. I forget the year exactly, it was around 1996, 97. But there was a significant lag between adoption in the US and adoption in Canada. And I don't have the chart, so I can't peg it exactly, but there was at least 2 or 3 years of wait and see. But when the market flipped, it flipped really quickly. So that's something to keep in mind. In 2011, we did a tour for one of our clients in Western Canada, and they were a crop protection company. We were looking for 2 partners. The technology partner we chose was BlackBerry. So I can almost hear some of you laughing now. I still carry a BlackBerry. I'm going down with the ship. But in Western Canadian ag at the time, cell phone or smartphone adoption had gone fairly quickly, but BlackBerry was the leading provider. Almost within 2 years after that, when we went to do it again, the market had flipped away from BlackBerry. So yes, that happened in the consumer market. It seemed to happen more quickly in ag. At other times, though, we also see ag leading the way. So autonomous vehicles, autonomous driving vehicles are actually getting quicker traction in the ag sector with self-propelled tractors and GPS and precision agriculture. Again, why? Because the benefits are immediate and easily discernible to the farmer. The same with drone technology. There we go. Another example of this one I find really interesting. It's slightly dated. It's from 2018, but it's the most recent information we have. So the ag market has not yet flipped when it comes to media. So what we've seen in the consumer market is a very rapid switch away from traditional media, traditional meaning traditional television, radio, and print, to more digital media or specialty channels. In ag, I'm not going to go through this chart in detail. What you can see is A, farmers are avid consumers of media, but B, traditional media is holding its own, more than holding its own. And farmers are layering new digital social media on top of traditional media. So this is a case where farming is moving slower. From the communications space, we keep an eye on this to see when it is going to flip. We suspect when it flips, it'll go quickly and there'll be a rapid move away from traditional media, but it hasn't happened yet. And it's interesting also, this does not break out along age lines as you think it might. So you will see people my age, 55 and older, avid consumers of social and digital, but you'll also see younger farmers who still read the Western Producer or Ontario Farmer. So just some things to think about when we look at trends in ag. So this year, when we looked at trends in the past, we've looked at, I'd call them bigger trends, things like precision agriculture, trade, our relationship with China. This year, we looked at 3 smaller or micro trends. We're not saying these are going to revolutionize the agricultural industry, but they're trends that are noteworthy and worth watching to see where things shake out. Where Joanne has easier time than I do, this time next year, some of her trends will have proved out. We may have to have this conversation in 10 years to see if any of these do. So the first one is called Nourish Me Locally. And this was kind of interesting as we dug into what's going on out there, in that I have not thought a lot, and I suspect a lot of you have not thought a lot about food service in institutional settings and how that might merge with the Eat Local movement. So we just looked at Ontario. I apologize. I realize this is a national audience, but we looked at Ontario only. And what's going on in that institutional food sector. And what we're seeing is consumer interest in local, and certain institutions now looking at, hey, can we do more in this space? So we looked into this one pilot project that was called Serving Up Local. There were 9 institutions that participated in this, and they switched about 25% of their total purchases to local over 2.5 years. The results were dramatic increases in consumption of local. And this is worth noting because the broader public sector marketplace is worth $745 million, so not an inconsequential number. What this means is that if this keeps moving in this direction, institutions, I think, which have been traditionally looking at how they can buy more cheaply and inefficiently, are going to have to look at how they integrate local into their service offering. And there's definitely room for our Canadian farm story in that as well. So if you're a farmer, you may need to look outside your traditional distribution channels and see how you can find a fit in that institutional marketplace. If you're a retailer, this is kind of a generic trend that says if consumers are more and more looking local, how are you able to service them? And if you're in food service, one of the themes I'd like to talk about is not only sourcing local, but communicating the benefits of local. Now that opens up a whole bunch of questions of what exactly is local, but I'll leave those for another day. The second trend is related. It's called Near Me. And it starts to think about what is a farmer anymore. So one type of farming that's getting some traction is urban farming. So this is getting from local, which may be defined as Ontario or 100-mile diet, right down to local as in my neighborhood. So in a way, this is back to the future. In Europe, that some of this still goes on. We've gotten away from it in Canada. So we pushed farming away from the cities, and now cities are even pushing into what traditionally would have been farmland. But now there's this trend of how can we actually grow local food locally, as in the city. Consumers, you heard Joanne talk about the fact that they are somewhat removed from their rural roots. They don't understand agriculture, but they want to know more. So what better way than urban farms? So urban farms are what the name implies. They are small enterprises that are happening in urban settings. It's an entrepreneurial push to get involved in the food system. I've listed a couple of websites. Lady Sarah's Bounties here in Guelph, they don't have a website or a Facebook. Lady Sarah, if you're on the line, you know where to find us. Or maybe Lady Sarah's got enough business. But these kind of things are something that we think are interesting and worth keeping an eye on. If you're a retailer, how can you connect with these local urban farmers? Like here in Guelph, we have a couple of Angelinos and Market Fresh, which claim to be local. This is a way to be even more hyper-local. And in the food service sector, as we just talked about before with institutions, how do you connect with these local producers for a win-win? And then again, that communication piece is increasingly important. Last trend, teach me. So this one, I didn't do this just to suck up to my hosts here. This was actually a trend that we looked at last year, and because CCFI did some more recent research, this kind of ties together some of the things that Joanne and I both were interested in and talked about, and that is consumers have an interest in more and more in how their food is grown, where their food is grown, and what's in it, but they don't have a big knowledge base. So one study in 2012 showed that more than 90% of respondents said they knew, self-identified as knowing very little or nothing about Canadian farming practices. That's not surprising. I'd say throughout my career in the farm sector or the ag sector, we weren't overly concerned with that because there were no big complaints or issues. So we did our job, which was to produce abundant, safe, reliable food supply, and consumers were grateful to accept it. That's not the case anymore. Consumers are more curious than ever about their food. And this result was replicated and reinforced in the most recent Canadian Centre for Food Integrity research. So majority of consumers want to learn more. They're not antagonistic, which is a good thing. But we in the ag sector have not traditionally been willing to engage in this conversation. The good news, and this is going to look like a small number, but it's actually a great number, 35% of Canadians believe our food system is heading in the right direction. And there's another chunk in the middle, about 42%, that are neutral. So neutral to positive, positive. So we're in a good position today. We need to be willing to maintain that and even do better. We're actually doing better in the US, where 26% of consumers think their food system's heading in the right direction. But the US is a little cynical and jaded right now. Almost all Canadians have concerns about big issues like food fraud. mislabeling, adulteration, and counterfeiting of food. So overall, consumers are starting to look more closely at where their food comes from and what it's all about. So what can we do about it? You know what? If you're a farmer, it's being willing to be part of the conversation. And a lot of farmers don't know where to start. But a lot of them are getting onto social media platforms like Twitter and being willing to share their story. I think groups like Canadian Centre for Food Integrity, again, not trying to do a total shameless plug, have a role to play in that as well, in helping farmers feel more comfortable and then providing or directing avenues where they can speak up. If you're a distributor or retailer, you also can have a role to play in promoting the benefits of Canadian farming and Canadian grown and sourced food. The Canadian government is wading into this now. There's a major initiative that's going to roll out over the next 5 years. I think there's still some details to be worked out, but it's promoting that Canadian brand. And this is all now important in ways that it wasn't in the past. And that's it for me. Now, I've been asked to ask you, if you have questions, please go ahead and type them out. I'm assuming the technology is robust and you're able to do that, and we will answer them to the best of our abilities.
We love questions. And actually, we're just gonna, I'll put one more there too. For those of you who want to download, there's the trend report. There's free downloadable copy. You just need to go onto our website, which is nourish.marketing, and you can get that as well. Animal welfare, yes. Has that been a trend in the past? Absolutely. That was one of our trends last year, and it continues. And that's all part of the eating less but better. So humane, certified humane, grass-fed, all of these free range, all of these are still very much growing in terms of importance, especially with Millennial and Gen Z. You know, we call it Made Matters, and it's all about, you know, we used to talk about the clean label when you read your product, but clean label is now extending to, you know, how are the animals treated, how are the workers treated, how is the planet treated. So our consumer definition of eating clean has expanded to include animal welfare practices as well. Good question.
And I'd say on the ag side, we have done a lot of work in the animal health sector, and I'd say this was took the industry by surprise, and we were slow to react. I guess I got a first glimpse of it back in the early 1990s. We were working on bovine somatotropin, and when the anti-technology people had run out of all other arguments, they tried to talk about animal welfare, and it wasn't good for the cows. But now it is mainstream, and there's activists who are getting onto farms, and so it's something on the ag side that we need to be more proactive about. And again, to plug Farm and Food Care and CCFI, these groups are trying to advance that cause.
And I think to go even further, you know, it's all about that transparency. And, you know, it's one thing to talk about how you treat the inputs for your products, but on your website, but it's much better to show people. So whether that is a photo or ideally a video showing those practices and getting credit for the good work that you're already doing. And I showed some examples that were to the extreme of that, which was sort of the live streaming of conditions. But certainly I think the standard keeps going up.
What is the role of larger organizations like BEAR and BASF, et cetera? And I'm going to guess that has to do with the confidence in the food system. So this is an area that, in my view, the multinationals have struggled with. They have tried to work through on the crop protection side and the seed side, CropLife Canada. And I think there's a yin and yang between going their own way and having their own messaging and relying on a larger organization. I do think it's a challenge for the larger organizations, especially the multinationals, who have to, you know, they can't in general have a Canadian only strategy. They have to participate with the larger, corporate entity. But again, I think that organizations like Center for Food Integrity and CropLife, that's a smart way to go. Pool resourcing and have a solid set of messaging and activities to support modern agriculture.
You want to scroll down? I can see there's some more questions there.
Oh,
yeah.
How do I scroll down?
There you got it.
Okay. Your eyes better than mine.
No, we're the same age.
Environmental impact of food, wondering why you didn't include a complete picture, i.e. carbon sequestration, cattle's role.
Keep going down. A lot of questions on regenerative ag. You want to talk about that?
Yeah. So I think the answer to why we didn't tackle those issues this year was it wasn't strategic. It just didn't hit our radar. I had just completed a study on 2 studies last year for a client around environmental impact, manure management, soil health, these kind of things. So these are definitely large factors. Probably, I'm going to take that as a good suggestion for future trend reports. I think that urban-rural interface and that environmental impact, and I also throw food waste into that same sort of bucket, because these are things that traditionally farmers have not had to worry about, and now they are incredibly significant.
Yeah, it's all part of the system. Okay, many of the trends were niche or small scale. How do we talk about critical large-scale farming operations, plant and livestock? Great question. Yes, some of what I talked about were niche, because that's where a lot of the change happens at the front, but then it gets adopted. So Maple Leaf Foods is the largest protein producer in Canada. And so they've actually changed their mission, their vision statement to be the most sustainable protein company in Canada. And they're doing that now with the carbon offsets and things like that. So I do think that there, a lot of these trends are playing out in big food as well.
Read this one. In this age of fake news, misleading information, cynicism, especially as Canadians, we tend to be more skeptical, cynical. How can food companies approach the education piece that consumers are craving and ensure it will be believed?
Yeah. So it's all about building trust, again, which this organization is all about in the food system. But you're right, we live in an era where, there's fake news. And I look at, dairy is scary. There's all these crazy videos where people go out and they put together a bunch of pictures from years ago, and they get huge hits because, everybody has, in the palm of their hand, they're able to connect with a lot of people and put out really sensational videos that really have no basis in fact. And, we don't tend to be fact-based anymore. We're emotions first, right? And facts second if we're lucky. And I know that when the dairy farmers came out with their own video to counter that video, it got a fraction of the views, even with resources put behind it. So you're not going to, that sort of sensational thing is out there. And that's why transparency, being as transparent as you can and inviting consumers in, is where you're is the best defense for that. Consumers want to understand more about farming and how their products made. They're asking to be invited in. Len mentioned that as well. So think about all the different touch points that you have and how can you invite them in. QR codes. I've got a QR code up there at the end, and everybody kind of laughs when they see QR codes because that was technology a few years ago and then it kind of fell off. But guess what? It's back. There's nothing that's replaced that. And every phone now, you don't need a separate reader. It automatically goes to that. You can download it. So you're seeing more QR codes on packaging and products. And that's a way of letting the consumer see in real time, what's going on. Consumers are curious. And a lot of times what you take for granted about your operation and what's best about you, you kind of take for granted. I have never met a farmer who doesn't care about, their livestock. So showing some of that, putting a human face on this is all really important. And, you've seen, McDonald's with beef, having the beef farmers, a big part of their advertising budget a few years ago was all around putting the face on the people who actually raise the inputs, not even the final product, but the inputs into the final product. So I think that's your best defense. Just, opening up the door a little bit and letting consumers feel like they have connected with your farm or your facility.
Yeah, on the ag industry side, and again, so I've been at this 30 years, what I've seen is initially, early on in my career, I'd say we in the ag sector didn't want to engage with consumers. We didn't see the purpose. So non-engagement, our second step was to talk from a science base, because that's what we're comfortable with. And by and large, this is my opinion, not a fact, science is on our side. But again, that has been shown over and over again not to be enough to win the day. BST, not to pick on that one, is by far the cleanest regulatory package that has ever gone through PMRA. It just is, and it is not registered in Canada. And the reason why is the headline was hormones in milk. So where we've evolved to, or where we need to get to, is being willing to tell our stories passionately and with conviction, but being willing to step up and not just talk science, I think, is critical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's certainly different, our generational research shows that younger generations, Gen Z, millennials, are much more accepting of science and food. They understand that going forward to feed the world, some of these practices are going to be required. So I think there is a way in there as well.
Yeah. Next question is about the Made in Canada, the federal government's Made in Canada marketing initiative, and is that going to be a trend? I suspect it will be. I think it's a really complicated area to get into for a couple of reasons. One is how do you define Made in Canada? Sounds easy, but when you get products and other things that have multiple ingredients, or I had a buddy who worked in the beer business, and they would, Grolsch, for example, would ship Grolsch in bottles here, so it was pure, but other companies will send a tanker load of beer here, it's bottled here, is that made in Canada or not? So I think it'll definitely be a trend. There's also a lot of word marks out there, and Joanne can speak more to that. So yes, it'll be a trend, but I'd be lying if I said I can see how this is gonna shake out.
Yeah, I mean, Brand Canada is great, and I think a lot of us have been saying for a while that the government needs to do more against this. So well done. We know internationally that Canada is known for its pristine lakes, soil, and there's a real halo effect when you get to that. It's interesting, Len was talking about what is local, and we've done a lot of research in the local area, and a consumer in Canada will see, if you're in Toronto, you will see a product from Vancouver being more local than something from Buffalo. So there seems to be that border that's getting harder and harder as time goes on. And so we do seem to think that Canadian products are local. That's great. There's been some great provincial programs out there as well promoting Eat Local. And I think because we have such a robust food system that's safe, it's time that we get credit for that and educate our own consumers as well as international.
Yep. Question is, do you see trends globally that are affecting the export of products, for example, environmental impact? Can we, as producers, address these? So from my end, again, coming a bit from the industry side, we do see a lot of non-tariff barriers, ongoing issues with China in terms of export restrictions that they sometimes tag on things like that are not scientific, but they're actual trade barriers. Other than that, I'm not aware of too much in that area. I don't know if you are, Joanne.
Yeah, in terms of trends, I mean, you see a lot of trends coming out of Europe and the EU, Britain now. They've always been a little leading on some of the meat and vegetarian trends, but North America definitely leads the way as well. And let's be honest, a lot of countries It's not about food trends. It's about just being able to get enough food on the plate. You know, we're in a very privileged position where we can talk about food trends.
Yep. My question about fake news, et cetera, are related to the Teach Me and related trends you outlined today.
That's you. You were teaching.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure if there's a question there.
I think it was just farther up.
Oh,
Okay.
Okay. So, any more questions? Products, I think we covered that. I'll keep going down.
Maybe final
Okay. Any final questions before we wrap up?
I'm not sure if I did a good job of answering the question then, but I guess what I was trying to drive at is the research is consistently showing that Canadians are not conversant with where their food comes from, but they're more and more interested. The opportunity is that this is not an antagonistic discussion. This is a teach me discussion. And again, I'm sitting at Canadian Centre for Food Integrity, so it sounds like I'm pandering, but I'm not. There is a need for someone or a group of someones to step up and help bridge that gap in a credible way. My feeling is that we've tried to do it with silence and hoping it goes away, and we've tried to do it with science, and now we've got to step up in a more credible way, storytelling, the emotional part of it. You know, the day that Michael McCain got up and instead of talking purely about what they were doing, the listeria crisis from a technical standpoint of view, acknowledged it, apologized, and then talked about what they were doing was a turning point. That kind of thing goes a long way.
I'll just pop in at the very end and say thank you to Joanne and Len for hosting and coming and sharing all of the food trends with us. Stay tuned for information from CCFI. We will be having a webinar on March 10th. Through our e-news and our website and social media, you'll get information to sign up for that. And thank you very much and have a great day.